Okay, I'm Peggy Sattler, MPP for London West and Ontario NDP critic for colleges and universities. 1 week ago, on November 25th, we marked the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women and the start of 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. Today, I am joined by leaders representing students from across the province to call on the Ford government to take an important step in addressing gender-based violence by re-implementing the Student Voices on Sexual Violence survey on a regular basis, at least every 3 years. I will be tabling a motion later this afternoon to urge the government to do that. In 2018, the previous government implemented the Student Voices on Sexual Violence survey in all Ontario universities, colleges, and private colleges on a one-time basis, despite the efforts of the NDP to require survey implementation on a regular cycle. In 2019, a report on the survey was published, providing valuable information for individual institutions on the prevalence of sexual violence on campus and student perceptions of and experiences with the supports available. Those results are now more than 6 years old, and without updated data, it is difficult to know if any of the measures that have been put in place on campus are making a difference. Women aged 15 to 24 are at highest risk for experiencing gender-based violence, and many are attending post-secondary education. Gender-based violence can have a profound and traumatic effect on a survivor's college or university experience, their academic success, and even whether they finish school. Addressing sexual violence through both prevention efforts and evidence-based support and resources for survivors is critical in ensuring that Ontario's post-secondary institutions allow every student to thrive. But solutions can only be effective if they're based on a robust understanding of what students are experiencing and what they need. Most of all, of course, solutions need resources. The chronic underfunding of our post-secondary sector is challenging institutions even to maintain the supports that are currently available, and budgets are stretched too thin to engage in any meaningful training. That's why my motion also calls for the allocation of funding to act on the survey findings and implement annual gender-based violence training. I now want to welcome the student leaders who are supporting my motion and who will each share a few words. First, we will hear from Maya Hobbs and Michelle Woodchist-Johnson from the Ontario Undergraduate Student Alliance. They will be followed by Alex O'Stryker from Ontario Student Voices, Olivia Villeneuve from College Student Alliance, and Kyla Weiler from CFS Ontario. So, USA.
Good morning. Thank you all for joining us, and a special thank you to MPP Sattler and her team for inviting us to speak today. My name is Maya Hobbs, and I'm a student leader from McMaster University, representing the Ontario Undergraduate Student Alliance.
And my name is Michelle, and I'm this year's Ontario Undergraduate Student Alliance president and a student leader at the University Students' Council at Western University.
We are pleased to be here today to offer our support for the legislative motion, which would seek to regularly administer the Student Voices on Sexual Violence survey. Gender-based and sexual violence is a pervasive issue on post-secondary campuses. In fact, 63.2% of university student respondents have reported experiencing sexual harassment, and 23% reported some form of a non-consensual sexual experience. However, almost 60% stated that they had a low understanding of how to access institutional sexual violence supports.
Specifically, Western had a disproportionate problem in comparison to many of our peer institutions, as we had among the worst record of any Ontario university. Over 70% of Western students reported experiencing sexual harassment, and 32.4% reported a non-consensual sexual experience.
How do we know all of this? Because of the Student Voices on Sexual Violence survey. When it was first distributed in 2018, the survey provided important insight on the climate of gender-based and sexual violence on Ontario's campuses. This data has been used to inform policy recommendations, drive targeted interventions at specific institutions, and most importantly, develop solutions to support and protect students. Gender-based and sexual violence is already an underreported issue, which is why collecting information on this is crucial. It results in quantifiable evidence that can bridge the gap between lived experiences and policy changes to keep students safe.
Following the events of our orientation week in 2021, Western's campus came together to demand that the university address incidents of gender-based and sexual violence. Standing in the sea of students and hearing the combined voices of thousands of students during the walkout in September was a pivotal moment of my time in post-secondary, and a key reason that I have found myself in a position of student leadership today. Students demanded that Western implement greater measures to keep students safe, but without being able to survey students and garner feedback on Western's solutions, we have no idea if they've made an impact on the campus climate without meaningful data collection.
Establishing data collection on a recurring basis ensures that post-secondary decision-makers have an up-to-date understanding to shape relevant policies and solutions for evolving issues. For example, technology-facilitated gender-based violence has been a rising topic over the past few years. There is no data about the prevalence of this specifically in Ontario, but as our world has shifted to more digital ways of learning and working, it is crucial to know how this form of gender-based and sexual violence is being inflicted upon students.
We cannot address an issue without having data on the issue. This is why we hope that the legislature will adopt the motion being put forth to implement the Student Voices on Sexual Violence survey on a recurring basis. Students deserve policies, programs, and supports that protect their safety, and a survey is a proactive means to achieving this. Thank you, and I'll now pass it off to Alex from Ontario Student Voices.
Thank you. Ontario Student Voices, on behalf of the 125,000 college students that we represent across the province, believe that the Student Voices on Sexual Violence survey is an indispensable tool for understanding and addressing the issue of sexual violence in Ontario's post-secondary institutions. The last iteration of the survey provided a comprehensive data on the prevalence and experiences of sexual violence. The survey empowers policymakers, institutions, and advocacy groups to implement targeted interventions, improve policies, and allocate resources effectively. The survey amplifies student voices, fosters accountability within institutions, and builds trust by raising awareness of sexual violence and available resources. It also ensures the needs of marginalized communities, such as racialized, 2S LGBTQIA+, and disabled students are acknowledged through the intersectional approaches to prevention and support. We need concrete data to drive real change. The importance of data cannot be underestimated in our work to support student mental health and wellness on campus. This survey ensures that we're putting the well-being of students as a first priority. Continuing the survey would support Ontario's efforts to create safe and inclusive campuses and enhance progress made in supporting survivors and preventing sexual violence. We call on the government to recognize the importance of this work and commit to ensuring that students across Ontario feel safe, supported, and empowered. The well-being of our students must remain a top priority, and we see the survey as a part of that mission. And now, I pass off to CSA.
Good morning. My name is Olivia Villeneuve, and I'm proud to represent the College Student Alliance, an organization that has advocated for college students for almost 50 years. While unfortunately CSA's student president, Jasmine Bates, could not attend today, on behalf of CSA, Jasmine and myself would like to express our full support for MPP Sattler's motion to increase the frequency of the Student Voices on Sexual Violence survey. Sexual violence remains a significant issue on post-secondary campuses, with 1 in 5 students in North America experiencing sexual assault during their studies. This impact is even greater for marginalized communities, with 23% of transgender, genderqueer, and gender nonconforming students reporting experiences of sexual violence. Despite these alarming statistics, Ontario currently lacks consistent, up-to-date, campus-wide data to understand the perceptions, awareness, and institutional responses to sexual violence. The Student Voices on Sexual Violence survey was conducted only once in 2018, where less than half of college students in Ontario reporting have knowledge of the institutional supports, services, and reporting procedures. While valuable, a single survey over 6 years is insufficient for addressing this issue. A regular repeated survey will allow for institutions to track these changes, adapt policies proactively, and provide stronger student supports, aligning with the 3-year requirement for institutional sexual violence policy reviews to ensure that decisions are all based on current relevant data. At CSA, we firmly believe that increasing the frequency of the Student Voices on Sexual Violence survey is key to creating a safer campus environment. This is why we stand alongside MPP Sattler and other student leaders today in calling for action to make this critical survey a regular and reliable tool for addressing sexual violence on our campuses. To MPP Sattler, thank you for inviting CSA today to speak on this important issue on behalf of college students in Ontario and for your leadership on all these student-related matters. Thank you very much, and I'll pass it on to CFS Ontario.
Good morning. My name is Kayla Weiler, and I'm a representative for the Canadian Federation of Students Ontario, representing 350,000 students in colleges and universities as the oldest and largest student organization in the province. The Canadian Federation of Students Ontario has a long history of consistent advocacy for on-campus sexual violence resources in an effort to build a holistic and genuine culture of consent and combat sexual violence on post-secondary campuses. Sexual violence remains an ongoing crisis for students in Ontario, often affecting the most marginalized in our communities. The reality is, on our campuses, is that sexual violence is present and sexual violence centers exist in the first place to address the need for more survivor-centered approaches. Sexual violence centers are under-supported, understaffed, and are required to do more with less, while paired with a dishonorable and perpetual lack of funding from the government. Sexual violence remains as an ongoing crisis for students in Ontario, and there's a pressing need for sexual violence support that is not only intersectional and anti-oppressive, but is also most importantly, created in direct consultation with students. Data collection is vital to do this work. This is why we as students support the introduction of a reoccurring survey every 3 years to collect important data about students' experiences with sexual and gender-based violence on campus. Data collection is vital to the work addressing sexual violence as it informs what gaps exist in the current structures and outlines what needs to be improved upon. A consistent collection also ensures relevant data and updated language on sexual violence are observed and that students throughout their diploma or their degree will have the opportunity to participate in this survey. Students are also recognizing that this is not an issue exclusive to the Greater Toronto Area and further acknowledging the disparities to access support centres in northern regions and rural areas and throughout this province. It is therefore important that the survey is province-wide, and this cannot be done at the discretion of each institution to collect this data. Despite being the most impacted, students have been left out of vital decision-making processes around sexual violence for way too long. The survey inputs paves the way for students to be provided with long-term and consistent prevention and support. This is how we strive towards cultural change on our campuses. This is the future that students are demanding.
Okay, I want to give a huge thanks to the students who have joined us today and look to the media if there's any questions.
Do we know why they haven't done a survey in 6 years? Has there ever been any explanation? Was it just meant to be a one-off thing?
Yeah, the previous government had passed legislation requiring the implementation of the survey as a one-time survey. So it was implemented just before the Ford government came to office in 2018. The report was released in 2019, but there has been no sign that this government is contemplating re-implementing the survey at all.
Okay. It was mentioned that having another survey would help show whether some different policy ideas that have been implemented would have actually worked or not. Mm-hmm. Can we talk a little bit about what some of those policy changes have been and what you'd be looking for from a new survey to see if they've been effective?
Well, the survey that was implemented in 2018 gives us baseline data. So there have been a number of measures that have been put into place at post-secondary institutions. Each institution is required to have a sexual violence policy that is reviewed and updated every 3 years. But it's not being informed by data because there was that baseline information that was collected in 2018 that talked about, one of the students mentioned about the lack of awareness of resources and supports that are available on campus. There's no consistent collection of data to know if the efforts that institutions are making is raising awareness among students or is students feel adequately supported by the resources that are available.
if we could have any specifics of what you were looking for from a survey for your organization or your school, that would be great.
Anybody?
I would think I'll just add that we were mentioning that sexual violence support centers are underfunded and understaffed. And this is something that recognized during the Student Choice Initiative. There was a lot of funding cuts when it came to student organizations. It's one of those things where the data would be really important to know, especially when there's a new review of the sexual violence policies on campus, of what are the gaps that are currently existing on campus. And additionally to like the fact that it's no secret that sexual violence is occurring on our post-secondary campuses. But it seems to be that the lack of data and policy seems to shove it under the rug. So.
Also, I think an important part of the Student Voices on Sexual Violence survey was understanding the perceptions that students have around sexual violence and consent culture. And I think it was mentioned by one of my other student colleagues here that an important issue is the change in online information as well, and online harassment. And actually, in the 2018 survey, it was found that 15% of students reflected agreement with potentially harmful attitudes and beliefs around consent and sexual violence. So I think this is a very important area that we have to understand as online culture changes and there's very quick shifts around students. We have to understand how this can impact their perceptions of sexual violence and consent. So that's a very important part of it as well.
I think my co-student leaders covered the majority of it, but I know at Western, a really big thing that they've worked on implementing that students have called for is an increase in training, both on consent culture as well as in responding to incidences of gender-based and sexual violence. Western has done a lot of implementation and strengthening of the training that takes place for both incoming first-year students as well as our orientation leaders, as well as faculty, administration, and staff. But again, as so many of us have pointed out, we have no way of seeing how these have actually impacted the culture of consent, which is so much of what this issue comes from, is these societal perceptions of consent. And we have no way of knowing how it's impacted that without rerunning a survey like this.
Have you guys reached out to the colleges and universities minister about this? Have you heard anything back? What have you done to talk to the government about running this again?
Well, I'll let USA speak. I know that they have developed a very comprehensive position paper on gender-based violence on campus, as all the institutions have developed position papers and policy recommendations that have gone to the government on a regular basis. And certainly this is one of the measures that students have been calling for. But I don't know if USA wants to elaborate a bit on that one.
Yeah, I was just going to say we do have a very elaborate policy paper on this, and it has stances towards the specific topic as well. And that's our call to the government on this specific issue.
When was that paper produced?
So it was passed at our General Assembly by all of our student members in March of 2024. And then it was finalized, published, formatted, I believe, in a month ago or so. Yes, you can find it online, and then we do have a specific section on the survey itself which asks for it to be run, so we have that as a ratified policy stance. And then we also have some recommendations surrounding exactly what we would like to see in the survey and how we would like it to be created in consultation with students if it were to be rerun.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'm good.
There's just one more comment I would like to make. Reference to resources was made by several of the student leaders here. And our post-secondary institutions are in a financial crisis. The stability of our post-secondary institutions is very much at risk. And many of the cuts that are being made, budget decisions that are being made, involve staffing of student services like sexual violence supports or accessibility supports or other kinds of campus services. And so there is a real concern that even the supports that are currently in place could be at risk because of the financial pressures facing our institutions.